Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We warmly welcome you all to the Green Talk conducted by the Green Building Council of Sri Lanka for the month May. We are seeing the effect of climate change happening today. We cannot hold off any longer and must take action to prevent further damage and begin restoring our planet. As of now, we find legislations, agreements, and politics are undergoing changes to enforce the shift toward adopting more sustainable and environmentally friendly practices across businesses and day-to-day life. So, today's talk is a very special topic for all of us. Today's talk is Paris Agreement on climate change in reference to the green building sector. So without taking much more time, so we move on to the Green Talk today. Today, Green Talk will be conducted by Mr. Ranga Pallawala. Mr. Ranga Pallawala, a climate change and climate finance expert with over 20 years of professional experience, is working for the European Union's Sweet Asia program as the climate change policy expert. He's working on integrating international climate change policy aspects into the sustainable consumption and production and circular economy processes in the Asia-Pacific region. Prior to that, he served in the Commonwealth Secretariat as a climate finance advisor, as well as following a bachelor's degree in agriculture and a master's degree in environmental management. Mr. Pallawala has served in a number of organizations, including the UNDP, UNEP, and the World Bank of Finance Direct Access and Climate Change Project Development, as well as Mr. Pallawala has over a decade of professional experience in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change as a negotiator on climate finance. Mr. Pallawala has worked in many regions across the globe, including Asia, the Pacific, and the Caribbean in the field of climate finance access, accreditation, and climate change project development. Last but not least, he has been actively engaged in project development for the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, and Climate Investment Funds. So I cordially invite to Mr. Ranga Pallawala to share your valuable knowledge on this session. Yes, sir, over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity given, and I'm so grateful and thankful for giving an opportunity for me to conduct this session. So as indicated, I will be talking about the Paris Agreement and its role in the green building sector at the end. To start my session, probably those who have been involved in or participated in previous sessions that I've carried out, this is one of the famous photos that I've used in all my climate change related talks and public speaks in speeches in Sri Lanka. My question generally after showing this picture is, do you know this place? And of course, most of the people know this place. They have been there and they have taken photographs, and they are quite, amazed with this the particular building. This is in Nuwara. This is the post office of Nuwara. This building is quite significant in terms of the colonial history, because this is the second post office building established by the colonial government in Sri Lanka. So it has a lot of architectural influences from UK in this. But the relevance to this speech is that it has a relevance to my personal life as well, because I have spent my childhood in Nuwara. My father was a government servant, so he was mainly working in and around Nuwara, so I had to be with him. So my initial and the primary education was in Nuwara. So it has a bit of a personal attachment with Nuwara in my life. And Nuwara has a a different experiences for, especially for kids. When I was schooling in the primary school, generally our school started at 8:30 in the morning. Generally across the country, most of the school starts at 7:30, but it was an exception in Norelia. It started at 8:30. I think you all know the reason. It's mainly because of the cold climate. The morning temperatures are quite low, and it's basically impossible for kids to wake up in the morning or have a wash. And if you're not in a very well-off family, you don't have like hot water facilities. You need to, just warm your water in a stove or whatever, and start having that morning wash. Otherwise, it's pretty impossible to have it. And during the school, even at the primary grades, my uniform was a long trouser. It was not a short, long trouser, and have a long sleeve shirt, and a jersey, a sweater was a kind of a part and parcel of our uniform, and the tie was a must. It was nothing else because of the climate. There's no kind of a regulatory requirement, but because of the climate, without all those things, it was pretty cold for us to be in the classroom. So it was a completely a different experience that I had as a kid in Norelia than most of the kids having education in the other parts of the country. And on top of that, Norelia has been famous to be the only place in Sri Lanka which sold coconut oil in kilograms. Generally, if you want to buy coconut oil, you buy in liters or you buy in bottles, whatever. And of course, I'm talking about 3 decades, 4 decades back. So where the bottle or branded coconut oil was not that famous. So you have like big barrels of coconut oil, and you measure the coconut oil based on, basically it's kind of a bottle or a half a bottle or a quarter, and you sell it. That's how it happened in the other parts. But in Sri Lanka, you can't do this. In Norelia, I mean, because it solidifies. If the room temperature is below 23 degrees Celsius, generally the coconut oil solidifies. And that's the case generally in Norelia all the time. So it's the only place that you pour all the coconut oil on trays, and it's frozen. It's like the white color cakes, and you cut it into pieces and weigh it in kilograms, and that they sell it. That's how they do it. And I still can remember my father brings coconut oil, which is wrapped in a piece of paper, and he broods it as a kind of a loaf of bread. And some of the oil is liquidized and absorbed to that particular paper because the warmth of the hand. And my mom used to use that particular paper to light up the stoves at the very beginning. So it's a completely different experience. But if you go to Norelia, or people who live in Norelia and ask now, what's the situation now? It's completely different. Where you don't find coconut oil sold in kilograms throughout the year. Probably 1 or 2 months or a few weeks in a year, that might be the case. But that's only during the night times. But during the daytime, it's a completely different scenario now. And you can buy coconut oil as liquid in liters, in bottles. And if I ask what's the reason, of course, that's relevant to our topic, the climate change. The average temperature in Norelia has significantly gone up, and the room temperature has gone beyond 23 degrees Celsius. That's an indicator. It's a simple thing, but of course, the underlying story is not very simple, and it's pretty devastating story. So I'm going to talk about it now. And before that, I just want to share another small personal story that my father, wanted me to study in Colombo. So after the year 5 scholarship, he brought me to Colombo, and I was schooling in Colombo, and I was staying with my mom's elder sister. And the first couple of days in my aunt's place, there are a few amazing things that I've seen. Number one is the refrigerator. I have never used a refrigerator. I have never seen a refrigerator. There was no point to have a refrigerator in Norelia. If we cook something, we used to keep it for days. Nothing will happen. And the other one was this particular picture you can see on the screen. I had never seen a ceiling fan before. And it was a bit of an amazing stuff for me. There's some kind of a rotating fan on top of the ceiling, and it gives you a breeze. It's not really a cool breeze, and it's too hot for me. And but now the kids in living in Norelia, this is not something alien for them. Almost all the houses now have provisions, or at least having a ceiling fan or a pedestal fan. Each and every household. And if you about 5 years, 6 years back, I had a chance to talk to one of the sales manager who's attached to one of the leading electronic appliance sales company. And I asked him about the sales demand for refrigerators, air conditioners, and ceiling fans in Norelia. And he said, in the central province, the highest targets for the salespeople for refrigerators, ACs, and ceiling fans and pedestal fans have been given to those who are in Norelia, because now the demand is high. So imagine zero demand to this particular level is not happening automatically. People don't buy something if they really don't have the need, but now the need is there because the temperature is going up. It's a small symptom of a larger problem. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is about the climate change. So I would like to cover the topics of the current and projected climate change challenges in Sri Lanka globally. And then I'm going to talk about the famous Paris Agreement, what it is, and how it's been formulated, and what's the importance for our country and the global policy scenario. And there's a buzzword of net zero. And what is this net zero status, and what is this big urgency for us to move toward that net zero? And finally, I will be touch upon what's the role of green building sector in the Paris Agreement scenario, and how to implement it along with the green building work, and the way forward. I see a raised hand. I'm not quite sure, but there's a question. I would like to just give the opportunity for the person who have raised the hand. Is that a mistake, or is there still a raised hand? I see the hand is down. So, okay, right. No problem. I appreciate that. If you have any questions, just I think you can still use the chat line and ask the questions, or probably at the end you just keep your hold on for your questions and I can take it up. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a kind of a basics of the climate change. I think most of you know this. But I thought I will reiterate some of the facts so that we all are in the same page when you're going into discussion. So planet Earth is the only home we have, right? So far, that's the only place we believe that the life is sustainably existing. And of course, we are finding alternative, the planet B for us, but as of now, it's the only place. And the planet is generally a closed system, right? In the closed system, we have different spheres, right? We have one called the lithosphere. Lithosphere is basically where you have all the soil and minerals and the hard stuff you have find in the Earth's crust. So that's the lithosphere. And we have the hydrosphere. Hydrosphere is basically the water cycle. I don't need to explain. The water is available in the solid, liquid, and the gaseous form in our world, and that's the hydrosphere. Water is very essential for our life. And we have the biosphere, which is the fauna and flora, the living beings, including humans. And finally, we have the atmosphere, which consists of the air layer, which is which gives you a lot of protection for our life. So this is a kind of a closed system, and all these three spheres have cycles, and those are in balance. So the natural habitat or the natural systems, the ecosystem, and the natural processes are in this equilibrium. The water cycle, the carbon cycle, the everything, nitrogen cycle, whatnot. You must have learned those things during your academic life at one point, and those are in the equilibrium, this world. And these cycles have been powered by the sun. So basically, our planet Earth is powered by sun. All the energy required for us is being given by the sun. And the plants use the sunlight, do the photosynthesis, and blah, blah, blah. That is going on. And but unfortunately, we have significantly altered this equilibrium by the name of development, mainly because of the fossil fuel. So what we have done so far in the last century especially, that we have extracted the lithosphere and got all these fossil fuels and burnt that out and put it into the atmosphere. And at the same time, we have been destructing the biosphere in our Earth. So we have broke this equilibrium, and now we have a completely different composition in the atmosphere. And Earth naturally is trying to find the balance, the equilibrium. And the way of doing is that changes the climate patterns, it changes the temperature, it changes the wind patterns and stuff, and we're experiencing it as climate change. The predictable, long-standing climate patterns have been changed drastically. Basically, we have changed this balance. So this is the biggest issue, right? Especially the changes in the atmosphere. And it created what you call the greenhouse effect. I don't want to explain in that, but that's it. If you look at the atmosphere composition, each and every part in the atmosphere has its own role to play, a key role. For example, the water vapor in the atmosphere is very important to run the water cycle in the world. The largest composition of the atmosphere is nitrogen, and nitrogen's main role is basically to control oxygen, because if you have more oxygen, we will have natural burnings, because that's the ingredient, or basically the environment provide for ignition. So the nitrogen is controlling the ignition power of oxygen. That's how it happened. And the carbon dioxide and all the what you call the greenhouse gases also provide a role for it, because it provides what you call the thermal comfort for us to live. Because otherwise, during the daytime, without greenhouse gases, we will have like temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius. And during the nighttime, we will have minus temperatures somewhere around minus 100. Because by greenhouse gases, it traps some sort of a heat and gives a bit of an insulation. So we have the thermal comfort in our planet. This is what we don't have on the moon, for example, right? On the moon, we have like 15 days of daytime and 15 days of nighttime. And during the night, 15 days, it's like freezing cold. And during the daytime, it's like soaring high temperatures. So now we have broken the balance and we are paying the price. So gradually, the average temperatures are increasing. So it affects the wind patterns, it affects the water current patterns, it affects the long-standing climate patterns, and we are baffled now what will happen, and we are paying the price for it. Of course, it looks like simple, a couple of degrees Celsius going up looks like simple, but of course the underlying impacts, it's a kind of a huge domino effect, and it will have a kind of a question mark whether we'll maintain life on Earth or not. So that's what scientists have mentioned. So this is a big issue, right? So this issue was actually globally have been detected way back in 1970s. 70s, some of the scientists have indicated that especially the carbon dioxide, the composition in the atmosphere is increasing rapidly, and it's going to be a problem, and there will be a lot of environmental issues. So it was brought under the United Nations Environment Program. So we all know that UN, United Nations, have been established to solve global issues that affects people. It was established after the World War II to prevent World War type of a scenario, because we don't want to have the same scenario. So UN has been given mandate to work on these global issues. UN Environment Program has been mandated to look at the environmental issues. So this increasing greenhouse gases have been brought into the attention of United Nations Environment Program way back in late 1970s. And UN, the environment, they said it's a kind of a quite significant, and we need more scientific evidence, and it seems this is going to be a long-standing issue. So they have established the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. IPCC is the largest scientific body represented by scientists across the world, those who are studying about climate change. And IPCC is mandated to issue what you call the assessment report, the situation about climate change, what's happening in the world, what are our predictions, and what we need to do based on that, right? So of course, we have experiences about other global issues as well. So climate change is one. So IPCC is being, working on it, and they have been issuing different assessment reports in 4 years. Like very recently, they have issued the 6th assessment report. I will be talking about it a little later on. So this first assessment report of IPCC just brought out, and they said climate change is going to be a big issue. And UN Environment and the United Nations found out that this is a big issue, and you can't dilute it among the other environmental issue, and we need to have a separate body within the UN to work on this and understand on it. So that gave the birth for what you call the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC. This happened in 1992 during the famous Rio Conference, or the first, the 1992 Sustainable Development Conference of UN. So the Rio Conference gave birth for 3 important UN conventions. One is on climate change, UNFCCC. Other one on the biodiversity, or UN or CBD. The other one on desertification, preventing desertification, what you call UNCCD. But among these 3, of course, the climate change one, UNFCCC, is getting more traction and attention, because the issues are quite significant and felt by a lot of people, not only people, by the ecosystems and the countries too. So that's how globally this issue is being come. Why we need a global solution? Because these are global problems, isn't it? We don't have country-wise atmospheres. You can't say this atmosphere is United States and this is for Sri Lanka and this is for Maldives. For maritime actions, of course, we can do that. We can have boundaries, physical boundaries. But unfortunately, atmosphere, we don't. It's a common thing. So it's since it's a common thing, it's a public good. All stakeholders' engagement, all countries' engagement is required. So without global cooperation, we can't solve this problem. And it's impossible basically to solve this without global cooperation. So global cooperation is a must in climate change. So UNFCCC is providing that platform for the global cooperation. So these are a kind of a rough a map what happened and important milestones in terms of climate change. And I will be talking about some milestones, not everything. But 2015 is a very significant year, because where the global have agreed this Paris Agreement, which govern the global policy and legal aspects on climate change matters. So Paris Agreement is quite important, and we will be talking about it. I will talk a few of the other the segments as well. Before I move into anything else, I have a very small video clip which runs for about 2.5 to 3 minutes, which will show you how the greenhouse gas emission level have changed and disaggregated by country, which are the leading GHG emission country. GHG means greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases have the gases responsible to keep the global warming. I told you that the main role of some of the greenhouse gases is give the thermal comforts, but too much of greenhouse gas is global warming. So we have a plethora of gases that contributes to global warming, but all these gases in combined, we call it greenhouse gases or GHG. So among this, carbon dioxide is the most prominent one. But apart from that, we have so many other gases, including methane, nitrous oxide, etc. So when we are calculating all the gases, we convert it into one common unit. We call it carbon dioxide equivalent. So we measure it in carbon dioxide equivalent part. Let's see how different countries historically changed their greenhouse gases and what are the records showing. Just see, you might see a kind of a prominent figure, but at the same time, there will be some text and figures popping up, which gives you information. But enjoy. At the same time, it will be the kind of a basis for my next segment of the presentation. So you can see for different years in changes, the amount as well as the position of different countries. Um, so I probably have noticed that how the greenhouse gas emissions from different countries have changed. Very earlier on, it was like US was leading, and that was a very significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions, like when they are emitting around 3 million metric tons equivalent to carbon dioxide. The second place was Great Britain. It was like 600,000 only. So there was a clear leading role has been played by United States in terms of historical emissions. But at the same time, you might have seen after the very recent economic growth, China and India is also picking up, and China overtook US in terms of emissions in somewhere in 2005, 2006, and now India is the second. So this particular scenario is quite important as far as the global policy making is concerned. So that's why I wanted to show that particular video. Because based on the emission scenarios, the international politics attached to economics as well as environment has also changed. So geopolitics also affects the global decision making. That's a very obvious thing. So the climate change was not an exception. So I just want to highlight like three things what happened in terms of climate change, how the global attention and the global policymaking thinking has been changing. So IPCC, I explained what is IPCC and how it was established in by UNEP. IPCC's first assessment report released in 1990. So in that particular report, all the scientists have come to a conclusion, and they said, this climate change is a future threat because we are, in 1990, we are emitting a lot of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, and we are cutting down a lot of trees and forests. So that means in long run, we are going to increase the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere significantly in the future. So this will change the global climate, and the polar ice will be coming to seas, same as the mountain ice caps, etc. And especially the small countries, island countries, will disappear, and there will be more heat stress, etc. So they actually mentioned in 1990 it's a future threat. So we need to make sure that the future is not threatened, and therefore we need to start reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So basically, they mentioned that we need to keep on increasing the renewable energy composition in the world. So it was more of climate change mitigation focus. Mitigation refers to the reduction of greenhouse gas emission and increasing the sequestration. So it was mitigation focus, preventing the future threat. This was in 1990. And during this time, the main culprits were the main emitters, and that's, of course, been the Western and so-called economically developed countries led by the United States. So they said these are the countries have emitted so much in the to the atmosphere, and they need to reduce it. But after a few years, the IPCC keep on presenting their assessment reports. So they have second and third assessment report respectively in 1996 and 2001. And by then, the UNFCCC have been established. Their first assessment report came before UNFCCC, and that has been a kind of the precursor or the basis to establish the UN framework. But in the second and third assessment report, there's a kind of a U-turn of the scientist forecast. They said it's not a future threat anymore. In 1990, they said it's a future threat. The threats of the climate change will happen in the future. But after 6 years, they said it's no longer a future threat. It's already affecting the humanity. There's significant changes in the weather patterns, predictable climate patterns, the precipitation patterns, and these changes are quite significant. And while we are doing climate change mitigation, we need to adapt to this new scenario. If we don't change our behavior, not the individual behavior, but the patterns of production, consumption, the socio-economic, the economic development, sustainable development, whatever the patterns need to be changed, because the previous patterns won't compatible with the new changes that we have with the climate change. So they said, along with mitigation, we need to do some sort of a climate change adaptation actions as well. So this is a change happen within just a matter of 5 years. And it was the same until early 2000s. But the situation worsened because lack of action by all of us. We can blame different countries, but I would say all of us, generally the entire humanity, because we have done this damage and we have not taken sufficient attention on this, and we have been keep on doing the same thing. And so IPCC's the assessment report of 4 and 5, they said, now, of course, mitigation is quite important. Unfortunately, I have hearing a background noise. If you can just mute your microphones, that will be helpful. Thank you. So the assessment reports of 4th, 5th, and very recently 6th said it's going beyond adaptation. We can't change ourselves now. We can't change things, but it's creating some dangerous impacts on us, and it makes climate-induced losses and damages. I think we all have, felt this. What are these? So mitigation and adaptation only won't take us there. Now we need to manage the mess created by it. Losses and damages, the floods, the landslides, the heat stress and all. People will say, well, we had floods and heat stress, like even prehistoric era, we have evidences. So now why we are talking about floods and droughts and heat stress and all these things now? It was there previously, and then now it happens. So what's the difference? Difference is, it clearly shows that the frequency and the intensity of the extreme weather events have increased. Look at in Sri Lanka very recently, I think you all experienced the hot weather, isn't it? Very hot feeling weather, and generally the heat advisories came on and said it feeling like 40 to 41 degrees Celsius, right? If you can remember, the Met Department in Sri Lanka generally don't issue advisories on heat stress. First time they did it in 2015. And now they have to do it in every year, because the extreme heat duration has gradually increasing. It was just 1 day or 2 days and 1 week, but now it goes for about a month, right? So we are extending the duration, the frequency and intensity is changing, and we need to work on it, this losses and damages. And I've been working with some of the civil servants, administrative people in Sri Lanka, and they said how hard it is for them to work especially in the remote areas. The droughts and floods coming in alternatively, and they need to support people alternatively, and it's not an easy thing. And very recently, the World Bank issued an assessment on Sri Lanka's economy. And one of the significant things that they have mentioned is Sri Lanka was like at the bottom of the economic crisis. And of course, they are recovering. But Sri Lanka is not in a position to absorb the risk of extreme weather events. If there's a kind of an extreme flood event or events or extreme drought event or landslide, our economy is nowhere near to manage that kind of an external shock. So that means we are vulnerable, isn't it? So the economic vulnerabilities have been amplified by the climate vulnerabilities. I will be talking about it later on. So basically, it's not only mitigation, it's not a future threat. We need to face for it. But unfortunately, there are certain things happening beyond our control as well. But actually what happens if we don't take action, the room for adaptation will reduce, room for mitigation will reduce, but it will be taken up by losses and damages. So that means it will go to, I would say, uncontrollable, dangerous level of climate change. This is what scientists say. So this is science. This is not politics. This is science. So based on this science, of course, the international policies need to work on. So based on the IPCC recommendations, UNFCCC first introduced a legal instrument, what you call the Kyoto Protocol, which was adopted in 1994, right? It's based on, excuse me, it was based on the findings of the first assessment report of IPCC. And this particular Kyoto Protocol said the developed countries, economically developed countries, who has the historical responsibilities with a lot of GHG emissions, need to reduce their emissions, need to take legally binding targets to reduce their emissions, right? So they have set targets in two strata levels. One is from 2008 to 2012, a 5% reduction against the 1990 level, and then 13 and 2020, it should be 18% below the 1990 level baseline. And all these legally binding targets have been given to the developed countries because they have a historical responsibility based on their emissions. So it's basically like they have been lavishly emitting things, establishing, using coal power plants, vehicle, whatnot, and they have gained economic upper hand, and they have economically, the growth has gone into a kind of a certain level, but they have prevented the other countries of doing so. So they have done it lavishly, but now we can't do as we want. There are a lot of restrictions. So Kyoto Protocol came basically to reduce the emission targets, giving emission targets to developed countries. But geopolitics worked in another way, unfortunately. The US government, who basically agreed to this particular Kyoto Protocol, but we need to do whatever the international instrument, of course, the lawyers must be here. They know that we need to do what you call ratification. It's not just agreed. A minister or a president can't go and say, okay, Sri Lanka, we agreed and we sign it. No, you need to bring it to our legislation and pass it through our legislation. So it's formally approved within the country. And then we call it its ratification. Without ratification, you are not, admitted to that particular protocol. United States Senate did not approve Kyoto Protocol. They said, this is ridiculous. If we do this, what do you mean by 5% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions? So our industries, our companies, our country, we need to invest heavily on renewable energy things. So we need to divert our investments from production and marketing or whatever to renewable energy investments. And it will be like costly for us to do the production, and we will be uncompetitive in the international market, and it will affect our economy. So we are basically losing our economic superpower, and we don't agree with it. And the majority didn't approve, and US said we are not ratifying it. So you can remember, US has been the largest emitter for many years until 2006. So if the US is not coming a party to an international protocol, on climate change, it's like a wedding without the groom. And at the same time, there have been certain other discussions also came into the place. They said, for example, they found certain amount of loopholes in this particular protocol. For example, some of the companies just operating, suppose example, right, operating in Germany, just shut down their factories in Germany and open the factories in China or somewhere else, because in Germany, there are regulations to reduce emissions, but in the other countries, it's not, right? And in terms of price-wise, of course, the countries, those who have invested in renewable energy and bringing clean or sustainable products to the market need to compete with low-cost, similar product, which is coming from non-sustainable or probably coming from more greenhouse gas emissions. So this is what happened in China as well. Of course, you know, China is now one of the leading the producers for the entire world, but there are a lot of concerns about their emission levels. So there have been some of the geopolitical things also came up. So when it comes to the second commitment period, which is beyond 2012, some of the other countries also said, we are not going to join this. We can't do this. Germany, Australia, Canada, and Russia, they said, we are not going ahead with Kyoto Protocol, so it break down. But actually, during the first commitment period, there were a significant reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions. And everybody told that, okay, it's because of the Kyoto Protocol, but actually that's because of the global recession. Because of the global recession, the consumption level goes down, so automatically the greenhouse gas emissions reduced, but it is not a kind of a deliberate efforts towards reducing greenhouse gases through climate action. It's not due to climate action, it's a kind of automatic thing happened due to economic recession. So we can't really contribute or attribute the gains of climate action during the Kyoto Protocol. It's something else. It revert again once the economy started picking up and once the global recession is over. We have basically broke all the records. So we are now, every year, we are breaking the previous year's records of highest amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Almost all the countries, none of the countries have reduced their emissions against the previous year, apart from or exception of when you have an economic recession. I think it will be the case for Sri Lanka as well. For example, Sri Lanka, we might have a significant reduction in emissions during last year. It's not because of climate action, but of course, we had certain other things preventing us doing emissions. So Kyoto Protocol basically failed. It didn't work. So the global effort to solve this climate change issue went, in the back door. So it gave the birth for Paris Agreement. So Paris Agreement, basically, they said, we need to have a kind of an agreement where all the countries agree and we will come together and solve this. And because different countries have been arguing on different things. For example, US saying, we are not the largest emitter now. Look at India, look at China, they are emitting more. And you can't say developed countries to take more targets than the China, India taking less targets. So cannot be. Everybody need to take targets. And China and India says, like, we are emitting, yes, of course, but we have the largest amount of poor people in the world. We need to feed them. And we need to reduce our poverty. So our poverty reduction is our priority. And of course, we have not emit this amount of carbon in the past. So historically, we don't have responsibility. The historical responsibility must be given priority. And China said, well, we are producing stuff to the other part of the world. We are actually producing and emitting, not for us, but for the other part of it. So you can't blame China. And Saudi Arabia coming and said, well, you are planning to reduce the fossil fuel consumption, and that means it will affect our economy, and we need some sort of an alternative for this. So all the countries basically pointing fingers at others and giving reasons why they should not take the lead, but somebody else need to take the lead. So this was the situation until 2013 in the global scenario. But it changed there was a new idea came. They call it nationally determined aspects. A smart guy during 2013 discussions or the COP, he said, well, everybody's blaming about others. This country need to do this, that country need to do that and stuff. Just forget about it. Just discuss within your country. Forget about others. And you tell what you can do. You go back to the country, nationally, you determine how you can contribute to solve this problem. The concept of nationally determined contributions came with this. Now it is a very famous term. We call it NDCs, nationally determined contribution. So NDCs is the building block of Paris Agreement. So basically what happened is now each and every country determine nationally after discussions what are the targets that they can take to address the climate change challenges and contribute the global effort. They will not look at others. So they will look at what they can, their financial situation, their knowledge, their technology availability, poverty, everything contributes, and look at other policies, and they decide their targets. So basically, you give a nationally determined contribution to the world. So all these contributions are pooled together, and we set a global goal. And that's the Paris Agreement. So Paris Agreement said, once in 5 years, the countries will update their NDCs positively, progressively. So it's a kind of a gradual transformation in 5-year cycles. It's a local process. No one is setting targets internationally. Your Kyoto Protocol is an international set targets. It's a top down, but this one is a bottom up. And we do cycles in 5 years, and at least by 2050, after like 6-7 cycles, we will come to a carbon neutrality. Basically, we will come to an equilibrium. So after that, it will going gradually. So this is a good proposal rather than arguing of what others doing and what this is doing. So then people don't have any excuse. So the Paris Agreement gave the basis for this, and the Paris Agreement is accepted because of the bottom-up nature of it. So it also provides an opportunity at the national level to have discussions, dialogues. All the stakeholders can come together and they can mainstream climate action into their development priorities, isn't it? If the energy is our priority, we can put more energy targets there. If agriculture is our priority, we can put agriculture in there. If we have a kind of an other international commitment, we can make it in line with Paris Agreement. So the bottom-up approach gives a lot of opportunity. So it's an option to mainstream climate change. This is about Paris Agreement. But at the same time, we need to realize the problem is about the capacity and knowledge, because if we are given the task to set our own targets, we will set our targets based on our knowledge and capacity. So it's highly dependent on the country capacity and country knowledge level. So knowledge curve matters a lot, sometimes the technology as well. So we'll go back to discussions at the end. I have a few slides to discuss about it. And definitely there should be certain amount of support mechanism to keep these cycles going in a positively so we can reach this 2050 target. So it's about finance, technology, and capacity building. So this is all about Paris Agreement. So it's an agreement we reach to address the climate change issues. And it starts with like a very country-driven bottom-up approach. The targets for the countries are determined nationally through NDCs. So NDCs are updated once in 5 years. Positive way, you can't basically go back. That's one of the agreements. That means, like you said, we are reducing our emissions by 10% this 5 year, and you can't say we are doing it 8%, we are going back. No, you need to go like positively. So, so the NDC based or national bottom-up approach based agreement reached at the international level. This is what Paris Agreement. And the Paris Agreement, Sri Lanka has ratified it, signed it, And basically almost all the countries have ratified it. And it's the main global policy or the legal instrument that govern climate change aspects in Sri Lanka, so in the world. So we are talking about what you call net zero. Net zero is that we can achieve a balance, carbon emission and removals. Of course, there's a removal, right? Like photosynthesis and forestry, coral, mangroves. These are absorbing carbon dioxide. So there's an absorption mechanism as well as emission mechanism. So absorption and emission need to set off and come to zero by 2050 globally. So this is the agreement. So we need to move to this net zero very quickly. 2050 seems like a kind of a long time, but it's not, because it's not an easy thing, because you, me, everyone in this world, in this meeting, we are emitting greenhouse gases using fossil fuel. Fossil fuel is like, inbuilt into our lives, isn't it? You are using cars, vehicles, we are using electricity, we are using polythene, whatnot. Everything is contributing to emissions. So it's not an easy thing for us to basically move out of it. So we need to do it gradually. Imagine you can't ditch your petrol car now. You need to use it at least few years, and if you can't use it, you will sell it to somebody. So within the country, it will retain for about another 30 years minimum. So during that 30 years, it will emit. So you can't basically replace something quickly. Not an easy thing, because it needs a lot of investment, need a lot of thinking, it needs a lot of support mechanisms, etc. So it's a tough thing. So I'm going to focus on the green buildings now. What's the role of green buildings in it? So this is a kind of a data available from 2016. This is a very estimated calculation by this study. This is done by the World Resource Institute, and this is in their report released in a couple of years back. Now, in 2016, the global greenhouse gas emission is like almost 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So amount within that, 73% is coming from the energy for electricity, whatnot, including transport. And then agriculture, forestry, and land use is about 20%. Waste and industry is contributing to other. But within this particular one, you can see it has been divided into different small subsectors, right? You can see within energy, 22% of energy is going for industry sector. Energy use in building, it's about 17%. Residential is about 11%, and the commercial is about 7%. Shipping, aviation, waste, there are so many sectors. So you can see directly the energy use in building itself, it's about 17% of global emissions. So if the green building initiative coming in, of course, it can do a lot of mitigation actions, but apart from mitigation, you can do. So, so green building is not only green building, any sector, the role is that we have a projection for the future now. We know what's our target. We know the problem, and we have a pathway to solve that problem. Solve that problem, we can't do it like overnight. As I mentioned, if we do an investment today, it will last for about 50, 60 years. So we need to make sure that we do a kind of a future compatible investment. So I think the construction and building also need to consider about that. When you are investing now, you are investing for the next 50 years. So if the next 50 years about being carbon neutral, how the buildings can be carbon neutral, how you can make sure that the buildings are ready to be energy efficient, be renewable energy technology ready, the zero emissions, what sort of a design it should come from, how to integrate it with other infrastructure. It's not only direct, but how to integrate with like low emission transport, how to integrate it by low emission food chain, iron and steel, the sectors, cement, linking with other industries. So all these things matter. So I'm not going into detail it. I know you people are quite experts on that. You have been working on this. You have been doing marvelous work, especially the architects have been advocating for this. But I think still there's a big room for us to do it. In terms of technology, in terms of approach, in terms of creating awareness among people, the problem we have and the pathway that we need to take. At the moment globally, we have room to do this voluntarily. At the moment, there's no kind of a restriction, but I need to warn you that we see the global restrictions are coming in, and now it's becoming like mandatory in some of the countries. I'll give you an example. I work for the European Union Switch Asia program, and in European Union, they have approved what you call European Green Deal. Basically, it's a European Parliament directive, not directive, it's a kind of an approved policy agenda for the European Union to become green on zero emission by 2050. So they are keep on pushing their suppliers also to do this. For example, now they have a mechanism called carbon border adjustment mechanism. So what they are going to do is they are going to tax the products and services reach to European Union, basically their imports, based on their carbon emission. So if Sri Lanka is not moving to carbon emissions, it's going to be a big issue. I saw very recently now they're going to give the new GSP plus guidelines to Sri Lanka. I'm sure during the next cycle of GSP, the emissions is going to be a big criteria. So if you're not ready, if you are investing now, if thinking that it's not mandatory, we have freedom to do it, but when it comes to do it like mandatory, the retrofitting or basically turning back is going to be really, really costly. So it's not only the policy guidelines, but of course the trade roadmaps, the governance roadmaps, even the economic roadmaps are quite important for us to think what are the aspects we need to consider in this one. It's not only mitigation, but on the adaptation as well, because I mentioned that we are feeling the impacts of climate change now. So high rainfall, high winds, heat stress is going to be more frequent. So how do you make sure that our living areas, buildings are ready for this? For example, we have been very familiar to design houses or buildings for, say, 200 millimeters rainfall per day. But what will happen if it is like 400 millimeters per day and you are having it like 4 or 5 days? Are we ready for it? So that's the direction you need to think. What about the heat, the temperature? We are building stuff for about 40 degrees. What will happen if it is reached to 42, 45? What would be the energy demand? What would be the cooling and heating requirement, thermal comforts? Everything matters. So it's not only mitigation, but the adaptation and preventing loss and damage is also a big role that we need to play. I'm sure the professionals in the green building sector will take it up. You have done marvelous work, but we need to pull our socks a little bit further and do a little bit more action, right? So I'll stop my presentation with giving you 3 challenges with the Paris Agreement. I explain you how we reached to Paris Agreement. What is the scientific background? Based on the science, what we need to do. But of course, there was a political hitches and barriers. So we agreed on Paris Agreement, but we need to work on this pretty hard. The ambition is quite important. Ambition in the sense like how we keep higher level targets. Like I have mentioned, NDC is like you are being asked to set your own pass mark. So if you're not very confident, you will keep a lower pass mark. So even if you get like 1%, you can say I'm passed because I have set my target at 1%. No, with this existing challenges, we need to have higher ambition targets. The higher ambition coming in, you will have like higher confidence if you see a kind of a lot of support is coming in. Support in the sense of the knowledge, the professional engagement, the finance, the capacity, everything need to come in. So if we said, let's say Sri Lanka, if Sri Lanka to have a higher level ambition, we need to provide that support, isn't it? Of course, finance is a different topic, but in terms of the support from the professionals, the knowledge, the awareness, the technology, and if all these things are available, then it's easy for us to achieve that target. I think the professional support to enhance our ambition, not only the government ambition, but among the people and the sector's ambition is quite important. And it's a challenge, as far as I know. Technology, of course, it's a challenge. Some of the technologies we are using or we are comfortable with have been developed for the business as usual level of climate predictability. But when the temperatures are quite high, the rainfall is quite high, humidity is quite high, probably our technology is not suitable as well. Technology is not only the information technology or the hardware, but the other aspect as well. So how we enhance our technology, how we fortify our existing technology, looking at the future projections of the climate change challenges, it's quite a big challenge. I think, again, the sector professionals have a bigger role to play to make sure that you climate-proof our existing technologies. And finally, it's about the finance, the readiness and concessionality. One thing, finance, is that we all invest money one way or the other for our needs. Right? How to direct our decision-making on investments for a climate-friendly way. For example, we all build our houses. So when you're building houses, if you're not doing it voluntarily, a climate proofing, how a regulation, how the guidelines, how the professional approach can make it. And even with the finance, and in some countries, for example, rainwater harvesting is mandatory in their construction. And that means you divert some of the investments towards climate resilience. Sometimes renewable energy ready buildings is a mandatory sometimes. So you keep provision for put solar panels or wind power plants or energy efficiency, whatnot. So that means you need to keep that finance aspect there, not only through regulations, but internationally, of course, there are certain finance available. Concessional finance, not necessarily grants, but concessional finance, and some finance readiness aspect as well. But this is still a challenge. So low level of ambition, technology and finance are the biggest challenge for us to move forward with the Paris Agreement target. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me stop my presentation. I would like to open the floor for any questions or clarifications with regards to what I have discussed. Thank you very much. I have a few questions in the chat line. I'll take it. One is about, okay, my contact details. Of course, yeah, I will do that. Finally, there's another question said, what accountability measures or penalties are there to ensure NDC targets are achieved by nations? Okay, there is a compliance mechanism embedded within the Paris Agreement. And the transparency mechanism, and both these things to make sure that the countries are doing it. Transparency mechanism is there's a what you call MRV, measuring, verification and reporting process. So all the countries need to measure their actions, verify it based on the standard verification process, and report it. So the report is going to be internationally and publicly available. And when it's there, and there's a kind of a naming and shaming game is going on, and it's not good, then all the countries need to do good. At the moment, the penalties under the Paris Agreement is which called non-punitive. So there is no penalty as per se for not achieving the targets. But very recently, in March, at the United Nations General Assembly, there was a proposal by resolution proposed by Vanuatu, a small island country, and it was co-sponsored by 136 countries. So that means more than 75% of UNGA has presented, saying that requested the United Nations to take an opinion from the International Court of Justice on climate action. So if you are not complying with climate action, what you can do. So International Court of Justice, of course, playing a big role. There are certain countries, those who have not ratified ICJ, including Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is has not ratified ICJ, but most of the countries have ratified it. If the ICJ decided, well, we can take international legal actions against the countries, those who are not meeting climate change targets, then it's a different ball game. It's going to be a really fun. So at the moment, the penalties are not there, but there are indirect penalties. For example, the multilateral development banks like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, Africa Development Bank, European Union Infrastructure Development, blah, blah. So there are banks. So they have a collective of multilateral development banks. They have made a decision. Their support towards the countries, because most of the countries, including developed and developing, they take financial assistance from these institutions. For them to get the financial assistance, they need to be in line with the Paris Agreement. So there's very little hope for the countries to move to go there. And there are trade embargoes, as I mentioned, the carbon board adjustment in European Union. And some countries also thinking in the same line, the Canada, Australia, United States, they are also thinking of this carbon board adjustment mechanism. So there will be trade embargoes. So there are no penalties under the Paris Agreement, but due to the recognition of Paris Agreement, there are other places, other aspects coming on board. So I think it's a kind of a push factor for the countries to move ahead. This is what are the general NDCs taken up by Sri Lanka? There are about 10 sectors given. For mitigation. There's the targets for energy, especially electricity sector. Industry sector, there's a target. Waste management, transport, and agriculture and forestry. So these are the 5 sectors we have given certain targets in terms of mitigation, right? When we are giving targets, Sri Lanka has given the targets like in a kind of international compatible way, but it says against the business as usual. So it's like not like absolute cut of emissions, but if we go in the kind of a same pathway, we have projected this is our emission level. Against that level, we are going to reduce. So basically, we are going to bend the curve, but not towards the negative side, but still positive. But before 2050, we need to go down. So there are another target is like conditional and unconditional. Sri Lanka has given an unconditional target to reduce the energy sector emissions by 5% against the business as usual, unconditionally. Unconditionally means without no support, no international support, based on our resources, our expertise, our technology, we'll do that. But we will enhance our ambition to 16% if we get more support, like finance, capacity building, and technology from the other countries, we can do more. So most of the countries have given this conditional and unconditional. but this is the existing targets. I'm not in a position to comment about whether we have achieved it or not, or whether we are in line with what we have proposed for 2030. I'm not in a position to say that, but of course, by end of the year, there's a process, what you call global stock taking, happening at the UNFCCC. And based on Sri Lanka's report to that, we might be able to get more understanding of how we have worked on it. There's another question saying, during the drafting the agreement, did the Paris Agreement consider the historical contribution by the developed countries for GHG emission? And are they currently showing a higher progress towards GHG reduction compared to other developing countries? A good question. Of course, internationally, the historical emissions, we have enough data now. And we have enough data about the current emission level as well. But as far as mentioned, if we trapped into these historical contribution discussions, we might not be able to achieve the Paris Agreement. As I mentioned, there are certain things. For example, India, still a developing country, right? But India is becoming the third largest emitter for the world, and they are moving slowly towards that. But if we grapple with this historical emission, we might not. So now we are going with the NDC. It's a bottom-up approach. So based on your capacity, based on your understanding, you need to set your own target. As I mentioned, because of this shaming and naming approach, the countries are little reluctant to give a kind of a very low target. For example, US can't come and say we have set a lower target and all, because it's not going to work for them, because they are expecting a lot more ambition, because there are so many other pressures coming in. So there's no, I would say, the direct relationship with the historical emissions with the NDCs, but there's a request, kind of a unwritten law for the countries, those who are with the capacity to have a higher level target. So currently, it's again a kind of question mark. We have seen a kind of a dent in the emissions because of the pandemic. We have clearly seen that, and soon after the pandemic, we see it's skyrocketing. But now the entire world has now reached to another situation with the post-pandemic debt trap and the recession. So we are moving into high interest rate, high recession era. So again, likewise, it happened during the Kyoto Protocol. There might be economic recession-led emission reduction, but there's no kind of a hard and fast research evidence to attribute whether that emission reduction is due to climate action or due to recession. So it's time will do that. But at the same time, there are positive signs as well in terms of renewable energy investments. It's been like double, triple. Now this year, the first time it has passed 100 billion. The cumulative investment have passed $1 trillion for the dollars for the first time in renewable energy. And we see some of the big countries have taken bold decisions, like they will not sell and allow to sell internal combustion engine vehicles. It might be either hydrogen fuel cell vehicles or electric vehicles. And some countries have set targets that their grid going to be 100% renewable energy by 2035. Scotland have said they are going to be carbon neutral by 2030, and they have ratified that in their parliament. So there are good signs as well. At the same time, of course, I have plenty of other bad examples as well. There's another question: how are the NDC contributing to the carbon budget with the permafrost melting and polar ice cap melting? So this is basically what you're asking is how the science-based targets have been adopted by the NDCs. Of course, the Paris Agreement is a political agreement. It's a global political agreement. And that agreement has been reached by with some science-based evidences. So there's a process how to take the science-based advice to the UNFCCC. For example, we have IPCC, and within UNFCCC, there's a special permanent subsidiary body called subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice. So there's scientific information coming in. But frankly speaking, the 100% scientific information in the decision making, especially in the political arena, whether it's national or global, it's not there. So we are a little behind it, but there's a lot of advocating in it. And I don't see a kind of a science-based targets have been considered by the countries in deciding their national determined contributions. Even Sri Lanka, even the very large countries like Australia or China or EU. But we need to move to it. So going into like this dangerous level, like permafrost melting, polar ice cap melting, etc. I think we need to do that. So that's where we need to have higher ambition in the NDC setting. Another question is readiness of architectural design to climate issue and to look for alternative building materials with minimal issue related to carbon emission should be the priority. What are the global initiatives relating to this? I'm not an expert in terms of buildings, the emissions, but I know there are a lot of initiatives coming in, for example, sector-wise emission. For example, very recently, the cement manufacturers came together and they are going to have a voluntary target for the industry in the world. The largest, the producers need to come together and work on it. And they are going to, the steel manufacturers is also coming together and going to set some targets for the steel industry. So likewise, the business industries globally coming together and putting up voluntary targets now. I think they know that there are going to be mandatory targets, but before that, they are starting some voluntary processes now, rather than things are getting little, blur for them. So likewise, there are industrial level targets, but I think what we need to do is that translating or basically downsizing it to local level, how the local industries taking it further. We have seen like some large businesses, of course, doing it, but it's a challenge for us to see how the small and medium scale operators in Sri Lanka is also working on it. Because there should be certain support mechanisms. We need to make sure that our transition towards net zero is a just transit. We need to consider the socio-economic aspects as well. We can't exclude socially or economically marginalized people from the processes. We need to include. So the inclusive process is important. That's where the engagement of professionals are quite important. I'm sure Green Building Council will also work on it. There's a comment, I think, young generation in climate issue, young generation on climate issue should be a compulsory activity in schools. They are most vulnerable and least adaptable to heat-related issues, etc., and not educated on these issues. Major challenge in Sri Lanka. I do agree. That's what I said. We need to, for example, our school buildings have never been established thinking about the heat shocks. But now it's time, right? Even the school curricula timetables. Imagine we have all the big matches and the sports meet in April, March. Probably it's a time to rethink how to reschedule it with the climate issues and avoid the heat stresses. I'm just giving an idea. This is a kind of something pop up to my head. So we need to review that. It's quite important. So another question is like government construction regulation should address this. And what is the Sri Lankan legislature support to help climate change friendly construction? Again, I'm not an expert in this area, but I haven't come across any legislation being come up in terms of construction. But I know there was an effort in terms of building energy management and energy efficiency. I know there's been a draft legislation at the Sustainable Energy Authority, and it might come up, but unfortunately the pandemic and then the economic issues in Sri Lanka must have, put it a little aside. But I'm sure, of course, whether we like it or not, the legislation has to be bring in. It's a matter of time. And before the legislation coming in, probably the voluntary approaches is the best. And this is where the professional engagement is quite important. So I have answered basically all the questions in the chat line. I'm not quite sure whether there are any further questions. If not, I can hand over the mic back to the Master of Ceremonies.
So I think there is no questions for the audience.
Yep.
So I think we can wind up the session now. So before that, thank you very much, sir, for highly inspiring and informative lecture and taking time your busy schedule to be the resource person to the Green Talk. Thank you again, sir. And thank you all.
Thank you very much. And,
thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
thank you so much. And thanks for the invitation. I'm really grateful for the Green Building Council for that. And those who need to be in touch, I have put my social media taglines here in Twitter and LinkedIn. If anybody wants to be in touch, you can do that. And of course, you can get my contact details from the Green Building Council. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So much for your presentation. Excellent one. Thank you so much on behalf of the Green Building Council of Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much. You're welcome, and it's a pleasure.
So thank you all again, and let me give a few minutes to inform you all about our training programs.
Please share future programs as well. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. If you expect to get our Green Associate Professional membership or learn Green Building Concept, this is the way for that. You can register for our fourth batch. This is our Associate Professional Training Program. And after the completing Associate Professional Training Program, you can attend our Advanced Professional Training Program. If you hope to be a Green Accredited Professional, you have to complete this training program also. And this is our upcoming event, a workshop on assessing and management of the organization carbon footprint calculation. It will be commenced on the 12th, and it is a 2-day workshop. We have planned to conduct intensive course on sustainable water management in building. This course will be commenced on the 7th of June, and it's a one-day workshop. You can register now this workshop also. And if you want to know more our upcoming events and our training programs and our volunteer activities, please contact us at this email address, education.gbcsl@gmail.com, events.gbcsl@.com, and our contact number 01126799130. And you can know more our details to our website www.srilankagbc.org. And thank you all. Actually, profession like you are truly valuable to organizations like us promoting environmental sustainability in Sri Lanka. Finally, thank you all, and thank you very much, sir, again. Thank you.